with Trump, haste means that detail gets neglected. And when you're dealing with someone like Putin, you really can't slip up on detail. We found that already in the pre-negotiations with Steve Witkoff, that it really he wasn't in command of all the details, even of what territory Russia actually was occupying at the moment in Ukraine. And so these are elementary errors which are the result of this rush, this sheer haste to get things done.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Well, Donald Trump has always claimed to be the peacemaker, and his meeting with Vladimir Putin upcoming at the end of this week might be the final test of that claim. Here to discuss the upcoming meeting is the Times' Roger Boys, our diplomatic editor. Roger, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleased to be here, Louis.
Well, there are a lot of worries in Europe about this summit, but you've written this week that we shouldn't write off Trump's ability to secure some sort of ceasefire. Why do you think that is?
Well, Trump, there's a lot hanging on this for Trump. He's created a kind of portfolio of short pieces, as to say, brief, what I call drive-by conflict resolutions around the world. Armenia, Azerbaijan, there are loads of them, 6 or 7 by the last count this year alone. And it's quite clear that he's trying to build up a portfolio that will allow him to lobby hard for a Nobel Peace Prize, which will be decided quite soon. So there's something personal in it for Trump. There's a second thing in it for Trump, and this is what bothers the Europeans too. The meeting in Alaska is about resetting the relationship between America and Russia. Putin very keen, because in a way it makes it seem like the old days when America and the Soviet Union used to meet. And there was a lot of trumpeting then, and it was like the two great powers in the world sorting out the world's problems together. So it was very much an upgrade for Putin, and Trump gave Putin this upgrade without any concession demanded. So what's in it for Trump over and above a better relationship with Putin? And the answer is that he's also recasting the relationship between America and Europe. And that's why it was very important for the Alaska summit not to include Europe or indeed Zelensky on Ukraine. This is all about America determining the pace of change in the world with the people that he chooses. So what's underway is a rather desperate cry for help from Europe. That's to say, the European members of NATO, primarily, who correctly read a possible deal with Putin over the future of Ukraine. That's to say, a deal that might involve exchange of land, captured land, or even deeper changes, that's being read by the Europeans as setting a dangerous precedent. It would mean that America, United States, under Trump, accepts the idea that European borders can be changed by force. And this is such a fundamental violation of the principles of the Western Alliance that basically the Europeans are going into meltdown.
And as you say, there is a lot at stake here, but it's fraught with risk for Trump's own image as well, isn't it? I mean, if he comes out of this having gone in trying to set the world to rights and comes out with nothing, it makes him look a bit impotent, doesn't it?
Yeah, he can't go in to this summit, the Alaska summit, and come out looking like Putin's patsy. This was always the risk. For example, there was this risk, which he didn't, and he didn't really satisfy the doubters when he went to meet Kim Jong-un in his first term in 2019. And it was his idea was a very simple one, that he would flatter Kim Jong-un and open up a world whereby North Korea becomes prosperous with America's help in return for ending North Korea's nuclear efforts. It came to nothing, and Trump came away feeling he of course blamed Kim for his own failure, but it was Trump himself who had failed. He'd misjudged the willingness of Kim and the over eagerness of Kim to do a deal. And for the great deal maker, that was quite a humiliation. And he wants, obviously, to avoid this situation with Putin this week. So what may come out of the Friday summit is an open-ended agreement, and this is why Europe is saying, well, at least we could have one result if you manage to get a 15-day ceasefire out of it. So at least, the civilians who are being bombed nightly by the Russians in Ukraine would have that respite. And those 15 days could then be used to test whether Putin is serious about some kind of change. So that's the European position. It's a bit feeble, but Europe itself has put itself in this position, and a lot of European thinking at the moment is about how to save Trump's face if Putin turns cold on him, because nobody benefits from that. No, Ukraine doesn't benefit from it. And Europeans don't benefit, and nor, of course, does Trump. So it's quite a subtle process that's going on. It's not just the Europeans saying, for goodness sake, Trump, don't just roll over and let your belly be tickled by Putin. It's more complex and more subtle than that.
And, we spoke before about that track record that Trump keeps pointing to about bringing direct conflict to an end. I mean, some people are arguing that the absence of war is not peace, but, either way, Trump has pointed to these as I can stop wars from happening. I have that power. How should we look at Trump's ability to end conflict? And is that speed by which he operates an advantage going into this meeting with Putin or not?
Well, quite often with Trump, haste means that detail gets neglected. And when you're dealing with someone like Putin, you really can't slip up on detail. We found that already in the pre-negotiations with Steve Witkoff, that it really he wasn't in command of all the details, even of what territory Russia actually was occupying at the moment in Ukraine. And so these are elementary errors which are the result of this rush, this sheer haste to get things done. It's an interesting way of peace broking, the way that he's doing it. And I've tried in a column and another writing to say that it's not necessarily wrong the way that Trump is approaching certain things, because certain results come out of it, and there are patterns. So he's dealt this year alone with Armenia and Azerbaijan, and well, I won't list them all, but there are 5 or 6 conflicts that he claims to have put to rest this year, and the strategic logic behind it is partly to develop a containment strategy towards China. So quite often these deals that he does with these countries, and indeed one of the putative deals with Ukraine was about minerals, is about denying China access to the minerals that it needs to dominate the electric vehicle market, or AI, or all these other things. So the separate deals that he's doing with Pakistan, for example, he claims to have ended the Pakistan-Indian near war, so between 2 nuclear countries. We forget that actually happened this year already, and he somehow did sort it out, and he sorted it out by switching allegiances from India, which was his natural ally, to Pakistan, which is an ally of China in many ways. So he's and Pakistan is completely enthralled by Trump at the moment, and lo and behold, these peace deals will be sealed by contracts for American mineral extractors, miners, that will help get stuff out of the ground. It's extraordinary amalgam of commerce, which often benefits people close to Trump, a fear of the big enemy around the corner, which is China, and then this and vanity, the vanity that he can solve all conflicts in the world with a bit of luck.
Mm-hmm. And you talked there about some of the details that might have been rushed over by Trump's team there. What do we know about what Trump's image of a deal could be here? We keep hearing about land swaps, but both Zelensky and today Russian officials have said they're not interested in giving up land they control, especially in eastern Ukraine. But Trump talks about this idea of waterfront property, harking back to his property days. Do we know what exactly he means when he says land swaps yet?
Well, what he means by waterfront property, which indeed is a phrase that estate agents use because it raises the value of it. So he's basically saying that he can get something for Ukraine, which is part of the coast, the Black Sea coast. Because towards the beginning of this long war, one of the things the Russians did is destroy Mariupol and the routes to the Black Sea coast. And Ukraine was one of the world's biggest grain exporters, and it needs that coast. It needs that coast if it's going to survive as a exporting and independent state. So when he says something like that, it's couched in this real estate kind of mogul language, but has meaning. Yeah, it has meaning to the Ukrainians because that's part of the land that they would retain, that they would want to retain. Because it's part of their national identity, the national, in a way that the Donbass is not so much, partly because of the Donbass's ethnic makeup, but also because if Ukraine is divided between an old Soviet the remnants of an old Soviet state and a forward-looking Western-orientated things, then Donbass is a symbol of what they don't want to be, really. They don't want to surrender territory, Ukraine, because it's cost a lot of lives hanging on to it. And because if Russia moves in, it will have easy access to the rest of the country when it invades again. So that's what this is all about. There's part of the Ukraine saying, well, have Donbass, yeah, in return for something. A land swap could perhaps be done, although Zelensky would probably have to leave office for that to happen. But we're in this very, very delicate moment that will emerge only after this Alaska summit, which is, what are things worth? Yeah, what are things worth to Ukraine? What can it discard without losing Ukrainian identity? What does it absolutely have to essentially hang on to? It saved Kiev at the beginning of the war. The west of Ukraine, okay, some of it's being bombarded, but on the whole, it stayed intact. But what happens next? What could be given without it being an utter surrender to Putin? So there is a big. So there are three debates going on. There's a debate in Europe, and that debate is, how can we let Putin change borders by force? Where will it end? And what does NATO mean anyway if we let it happen? That's one debate. The Ukrainian debate is, we can't really claim to have won this war. Too many people have died, and Russia, although they don't openly say that, is almost unbeatable up to a certain point. But what is required is a national debate about where we Ukrainians sit on the doorstep of Russia. What can we accept from Russia's demands? And there should be a third debate, which is Putin. But Putin has frozen all debate in his country because any debate whatsoever would be the beginning of the end for him. That's why he has his opponents like Navalny killed in the Gulag.
Mm. And we've talked a lot about the kind of pitfalls that Trump and Europe face. And you say there obviously that Putin, as you say, there isn't going to be, Putin is not going to come home to Russia expecting to have to debate this with anyone in the Russian government. He will come home and set the agenda, whatever is agreed. But what are the pitfalls for Vladimir Putin? I mean, are some of those, the pro-war sides in the Kremlin going to be annoyed about this if it does come to a ceasefire? Are there people who just don't think he should be talking with Trump at all? Are there any pitfalls for Putin in this, or is this really just a bit of a PR coup for him?
Well, there are nationalists who in the Russian political establishment who think Ukraine, the whole of Ukraine, is Russian. Mm. So they will be looking out for any excessive, as they see it, compromise by Putin that allows even a rump Ukraine a rump democratic Ukraine to survive more or less intact. So that he will be vulnerable from those nationalists, who include many within the Orthodox Church. It's not just a bunch of loonies. Mm. I mean, some of them are, but it's quite a strong conservative lobby. And the second is the business community and the oligarchs who are beginning to suffer. The Russian economy hasn't done too badly, but secondary sanctions, and this must really remain one of the Trump demands, secondary sanctions on countries like India and China for buying cheap Russian oil and therefore keeping the Russian war economy operating. That concerns whole business lobbies within Russia. They think that some concessions, maybe more concessions than Putin is willing to give, are necessary in order to get the economy pumping profits again. But as you suggested before, the ordinary Russians are not on the street. Yeah, they're not on the street. They're not saying end this war. There's a lot of there's some draft dodging going on. There's a lot of people disappearing abroad. There's a lot of people with medical release from army service. And Putin's answer to that is to get the North Koreans in or other foreigners in because they can feed the machine. But the army itself doesn't seem to be in a kind of coup-like situation at all. They're seeing that their army is modernizing, that it's doing better against the Ukrainians, that they're learning lessons. They're not unhappy with Putin.
And just to bring it back to the White House, there is also this idea that's being reported in the Times as well today about the possibility of an almost West Bank-style model to apply to Ukraine. Is there anything realistic in that? Or is that, again, this sort of playing fast and loose with the details and just trying to find something that fits?
Yes, I think that's the case. Everyone's looking for models, just like with this Alaska summit, everybody says, "Oh, will it be a new Munich? Yeah, an appeasement of a dictator. Will it be a new Yalta? A new division between East European, between Russian, Soviet interests and the West? Will it be this? Will it be that?" And so we're finding, because it's so confusing to many people, that they look for alternative models. Now, the West Bank is, I can't think of a more irrelevant model for the future of Ukraine. I mean, what does seem to be clear is that if Ukraine is to be dismantled, then one of the fault lines might be the Dnepro River. And it's clear that in the Middle East, that rivers are also very important demarcation lines, and it's possible that Russia will try and lay claim to everything east of the Dnepro River, or a lot of land to the east of the Dnepro River. It would be a natural and almost kind of Stalinist model. Europe was divided by the older, nicer rivers after the war. It's a recognition of how far your troops have gone, have managed to come, and it seals that. It kind of seals that front line in some way. So, occupied West Bank, it's neither here nor there. But But there is something going on in terms of people laying out maps and saying, well, we're going to have this bit, and pointing to that. Because you see, the probable outcome, though it won't emerge, I don't think, in Alaska, is what Putin has been doing around Eastern Europe for a long time, which is to freeze the conflict. You just need to free. You don't necessarily demand that people legally recognize Eastern Ukraine as being part of Russia, but you can freeze the conflict for a generation, and you can just say, well, maybe de jure, according to law, it's part of Ukraine, but de facto, it belongs to us, the Russians might say to themselves, for as long as we decide that that's the way it should be. And that's what's happening. Yeah, but as I say, and as you rightly said, it comes down to the detail, and we're not expecting a lot of detail really out of Alaska. But the detail will follow, and that's what follows.
And as we're speaking, Trump and his VP JD Vance have, finished up their meeting with European leaders, including President Zelensky. We've seen Zelensky making some comments afterwards, including the German Premier
Chancellor.
Chancellor Merz. Does Europe have any role in these negotiations, or have they really just been left out in the cold?
Yeah, they have been left in the cold, but they're stirring because, well, first of all, they are now the biggest since Trump has sort of withdrawn America from as a major military aid donor to Ukraine. Europe is the biggest donor. So that's the first thing. It does have skin in the game, and the second thing is, as I said, this whole question of a precedent. Yeah, it's not just the future of Ukraine that's being discussed; it's the future of Europe. Yeah, it's who has a say over that chunk of Europe.
And just finally, as we haven't got much time left, is Trump going to get his Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I mean, he thinks he should, but there are other. Bill Clinton, for example, he solved or reached peace deals in 6 wars: Bosnia, Kosovo, Northern Ireland. And never got the Nobel Prize. Obama, and that's the one that really rankles with Trump, got what one might call a preemptive Nobel Peace Prize. Let's say he got a prize in the hope that he would do things that would make everyone able to forget George Bush's different wars. In fact, Obama didn't do all that well, and Trump is, Trump is determined to show that he can do all these things. But as I say, it's done like a 1920s Chicago mobster. He bursts in, he claims ownership of deals that he didn't really make, in some cases, and there's always this doubt: can he make them stick?
Yep.
Can he make any of these deals that he's done, peace deals that he's done, stick? And the biggest test of all, at the moment anyway, we haven't even started to talk about Gaza, but is Ukraine. Yeah, and if he fails at Ukraine, then Nobel Committee can choose some other group, some worthy, group of Buddhists or something. Yeah.
Well, Roger Boys, the Times' diplomatic editor, thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Thank you, Louis.